Hello, everyone. Welcome, everyone. And happy National Adaptive Sport Day. Woo! My name is Dr. Kaylee McCauley Sayer. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of Member Services at Move United. I am a white woman with freckles. I have brown hair tied up in a bun today, and I'm wearing a black polo shirt with our Move United logo embroidered with white thread. Thank you all for joining us to celebrate National Adaptive Sport Day today. April 28th marks the anniversary of the signing of the regulations enforcing Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the landmark civil rights legislation that barred discrimination against people with disabilities in federally funded programs, including sport and recreation. The Move United staff team is honored to celebrate the life and legacy of Eli Wolf in making this celebration, a reality. Thank you again for being here to celebrate with us. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Live captions are enabled for this webinar session. Please go ahead and toggle that button on if you need captions for the session. Following the panel discussion, we will have a Q&A session. Please use the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit your questions for the panelists. Also, the chat is open, so if you'd like to engage with one another or celebrate something that one of our panelists shares today, please go ahead and use the chat for that. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Sherry Blauette, who will be moderating our panel today. Sherry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kaylee. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning or afternoon, dependent on your time zone, to celebrate the inaugural National Adaptive Sports Day. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Sherry Blauette. I am a Paralympic athlete in the sport of wheelchair racing. I competed back in the day in Sydney 2000, Athens 2004, and Beijing 2008. I currently work as a physician leader and the chief clinical officer at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab in Chicago. I am a Caucasian woman with blondish brown wavy hair. I'm wearing a navy blue suit, and I'm in the background of my office here at work. And again, so thrilled to be with you all here today. So we have an esteemed group of panelists joining us for this event. I'm so excited to dig into this conversation. We're really going to be focusing on the past, present, and future of adaptive sports. So, where have we come from? What have we learned from our history? And particularly the important legacy of leadership of my late husband, Eli Wolf, who really created the vision for bringing together the community through National Adaptive Sports Day. We'll talk about the present, the current state of affairs as it relates to adaptive sports across the US and across the world, and the intersection of our many communities of community-based nonprofit organizations, the university ecosystem, and even the Paralympic movement. And then we'll think about the future and where do we go from here to really realize that vision of true inclusion across sports. So I see it's already happening, but I welcome everyone to please introduce yourself in the chat. Again, the Q&A feature is open. Please plop in your questions as we go. And with that, we'll get started. So firstly, we are going to go around the Zoom and we'll have our panelists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their current role and their connection to adaptive sports. So Anjali, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloat. Happy National Adaptive Sport Day, everyone. My name is Dr. Anjali Forber-Pratt, and I use she, her pronouns, and I have brown skin and long black hair that's up in a ponytail, and I'm wearing a pink suit and a black top, and not seen on screen, I'm sitting in my manual wheelchair. I am the Director of Research at the American Association on Health and Disability, and I am a two-time Paralympian and medalist in the sport of wheelchair racing and competed with Sherry in Beijing and also competed in London. And I am a board member and volunteer coach for Pikes Peak Parasport, a very new adaptive sport organization that was launched this year, led by Jeremy Bennett and Amanda McGrory. And we have a goal of becoming a Move United chapter. And I'm a former board member of Move United, which was then Disabled Sports USA, and served on the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee's Athlete Advisory Council, now the Athletes Commission, where we worked hard to ensure athlete voice was included and considered in decisions affecting elite Olympic and Paralympic athletes. And then I would also add that in addition to myself being involved in adapted sports since I was 5 years old, adaptive sports has shaped my research career too, exploring the roles in which sport influences identity development for people with disabilities. So really excited to be here today.
Thank you, Anjali. Next, we'll turn it to Chuck.
Thank you, Dr. Blowett, and it's nice to see everybody this afternoon here from the East Coast. Yeah, my name is Chuck Aoki. I use he/him pronouns. I am a still young-looking 35-year-old male with some hair remaining. There's not as much as there was a decade ago, and I have a red Team USA shirt on, and I'm sitting here in my kitchen. Actually, it's the best lighting in the house. So I grew up in adaptive sports, much like Dr. Ford Pratt. I started in adaptive sports when I was 7 years old. I am a four-time Paralympic medalist in the sport of wheelchair rugby. My first games was London, and I competed all the way through Paris a couple of years ago, and I am still training for Los Angeles in just a couple of years. So very excited to hopefully touch on that a bit later in the presentation. In addition to that, I work at the University of Michigan in our adaptive sports and fitness program as our head wheelchair rugby coach. But for those who know a bit about our program, if you work here with us, you kind of do a bit of everything. So we do a lot of events touching on adaptive sports, both competitively, but also community. And also we do a lot of school-based programming as well. That's very exciting. And I think folks who are at the education conference just a couple of weeks ago probably heard from Eric Rebesniks. And of course, we're very excited to be hosting the Move United Education Conference next year in Ann Arbor. And in addition to that, I also serve currently on the Team USA Athletes Commission as one of our vice chairs. And so we are continuing to, as Anjali said, advocate on behalf of all Olympic and Paralympic athletes across the movement. It's a really rewarding position to be in and a really exciting time to be in that level of the movement. There's lots of challenges, of course, but we are still, we're still, I like to say I'm always optimistic to this day. So very excited for the conversation to come.
Excellent. Thank you, Chuck. Next, we'll go with Ted. Ted, can you please introduce yourself? Oh, you're muted, Ted. Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. I can do this all over again. First of all, I am the old fossil on this panel. I am officially now recently 77 years old. I am white, Caucasian, I would say thinning gray hair, brown eyes. I'm wearing a blue shirt overlap with a blue pleats vest. I go by he, his, him pronouns. Oh, yes, I am a grandfather of six, too. So actually, Sherry gave me a brief introduction before. She didn't name me by name about the history, because between a couple of us on this panel, we kind of span back into the 60s, let alone the 70s. And so I'll try to be short. I'm a retired professor emeritus from the State University of New York at Cortland, where I taught for 19 years after Mary was polite enough and aggressive enough to allow me to finish my PhD at age 50. So what do I know about this space? I actually cut my teeth with a couple of champions of disability rights, Judy Heumann, Ed Roberts, and a few other characters back in the 70s in Berkeley. At a high school, I started a shared adventures program to actually match up high school youth as adventure partners with blind, visually impaired adults in the Bay Area. So that's my starting point. I met Harry Cordelis, a very acclaimed, totally blind marathon runner. I became his race guide in the second Winter Paralympic Games in Yale in Norway in 1980. And then my Paralympic career ended in Vancouver in 2010 as a technical classifier. In between, I was head coach. I was various other roles with the IPC as well as the U.S. skiing. Went back to school. And then in 1999, maybe it was 2000, I met this young man. Boy, was he a character. His name was Eli Wolf. We formed the Disability in Sport platform along with Mary. and later David Legg and Josh Pate. And well, sadly, obviously, Eli passed away, but we have still been at this. This is not, people say, "What are you doing in retirement?" I said, "I'm still working. The work is still needing to be done." So that's a bit of who I am, and I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Ted. Okay, next we'll go to Gianni.
Hey everybody, my name is Gianni Quintero. I am a current high schooler, 18, at Marquette University High School in Milwaukee. I play wheelchair basketball and wheelchair track and hope to make it to LA 2028 for track. So Chuck, maybe I'll see you there, maybe not. Um, Continuing to train hard. I have long flowy hair, brown eyes, and wearing a blue jacket.
Awesome. Thanks, Gianni. And Anjali and I would say you picked the best sport. So nice job on the wheelchair racing piece. Okay, last but far from least, over to you, Mary.
All right. Well, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Mary Hums, and I am a professor of sport administration at the University of Louisville. I am an almost Ted's age, but not quite woman with short brown hair. I wear big brown rimmed glasses. I'm wearing a blue blazer and a wonderfully, beautifully colored lapel pin today that Eli gave me, the colors of which represent the different United Nations the millennial goals, the millennial development goals. So Eli gave me that, and I always wear it whenever I can. I go by the she, her pronouns, and my background today is a lovely landscape of the Canadian Rockies. So in terms of my work with disability sport, I have worked for Paralympic Games in different capacities. I've done a lot with sports information, so it's been sort of more on the management side, sports information, and also venue ops were some of the positions that I held. And I worked at different sports at goalball, at sled hockey, which is happens to be my favorite. I worked those 4 games. Also worked the Parapans when they were in Toronto. So in my work at school, my research revolves around mostly sport for people with disabilities and sport and human rights. I was just as Ted, so lucky to be able to work with Eli over the years on the many projects that he spearheaded, including being a co-contributor to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as well as helping develop the International Day of Sport for Development and Peace. And here we are at National Adaptive Sport Day. So I've been very fortunate to be involved in all of those. And on the local level, I was also a founding and current board member of the Miracle League of Louisville, which of course is for baseball for young people with disabilities. So very happy about that. So that's enough. Sherry, back to you.
All
Thank you.
right. All right. Well, thank you. Really fantastic. And I think our audience can see just the depth of expertise and experience that we have on this panel. So we're excited to dig in. So we're going to start with the question. Chuck, I'm going to go to you first. And if you could talk briefly about, when you were a kid, you talked about getting involved when you were 7. What was that initial hook that drew you to adaptive sports? And you've now been at it for a while. So what has kept you involved?
Yeah, great. Gosh, well, I think everyone's story of why they've stayed in adaptive sports is unique. So I certainly wouldn't speak for everyone. I think we all have wonderful dreams. But yeah, I was a rambunctious kid who grew up with a disability who was constantly hurting themselves. And of course, my parents were like, well, okay, like great, but we need to find some outlet for this energy. And so, they quite literally just I got recruited in a parking lot to play wheelchair basketball one day by a woman named Sharon Van Winkle, who some may know. She yelled at me across the parking lot, "Would you like to play wheelchair basketball?" I said, "Yes." And my mom said, "Okay, you play wheelchair basketball now," and so that's really how it started, which I think is both a fun story, but also a little bit sad, shall we say, that how so many people get recruited to adaptive sports is by chance meeting, so to speak. But so yeah, I started playing wheelchair basketball. I loved it. I saw the movie Murderball 2005, saw the sport I could crash into people, said, well, that looks amazing. Fell in love with that sport, started playing right away. But I think what does fundamentally keep me coming back to adaptive sports is really 2 things. One, it's a passion for it, right? I love it. This is one of the coolest things I've ever got to do, to represent our country, travel across the world. Things that I never dreamed of growing up. At first, the things I never would have thought I could were possible. for a time. So I think, fundamentally there's just a passion and a heart behind it. But I think the other part that still keeps me coming back, especially as we're seeing the movement grow in awareness and publicity and media and things like that, is, a lot of times I get asked, who did you look up to growing up in terms of like athletes? And I say, well, I didn't really have anyone that I knew of. They were out there. I know that now, but they weren't really visible to me. They weren't aware. I wasn't able to go out and see them in the way that I think kids with disabilities are today now. And so I think part of what keeps me coming back is that we're in this unique moment here, this unique opportunity where adaptive sports, Paralympic sports are really starting to the profile is starting to raise. And I want to be a part of it, quite frankly. Kids don't have to want to look up to be Chuck Aoki. They can look up to be any number of the incredible Paralympic athletes we have out there. But there's so much power in being able to be that, hopefully be that for some kids out there. And I think that's what keeps me coming back fundamentally is I want to make sure that I leave a good legacy behind. I know I'm closer to the end of my career than the beginning of it, although some would tell you that's not the case. They would be wrong. But so, yeah, I think really that's what keeps me coming back is those dual, just a passion and a joy and a love for it that brings to me. I tell folks all the time, I love going to these training camps and training as much as I did when I first started. And quite frankly, if I didn't, I wouldn't keep doing it. Because the amount of effort and energy and time that goes into it is enough that it has to be something you truly love and truly cherish. And something I tell developing athletes now is like, you need to love the process that leads you to get there. It's, the moment is great, but the moment is fleeting. So yeah, I think those are really what keep me around and keep me going. And it's been an amazing ride and it's hopefully not done just yet.
That's right. Well, I hope not. I hope LA 28 comes through. But thanks, Chuck. So poignant. And I think you're really emphasizing the importance of role modeling, right? And I would say the same growing up in the 2000s, late 90s and 2000s, it was really hard to find those role models. And so thankful that that is now starting to change. Okay, next question is for you, Gianni. If you could talk a little bit about, your career in adaptive sports is on the earlier side, right? Like really just getting launched, aiming for LA 28 as an emerging athlete. How do you feel that adaptive sport has impacted you personally, and in your like school and education?
So within school and education, it kind of brought a new light to my classmates or my other track teammates. They get to learn a new thing and understand how I can pretty much do the same things as them, just in what we over here in the Midwest like to call a different pair of shoes. But I I know they see it as a cool opportunity. And even with basketball, I bring some of my classmates, people in school, some of my teachers too. Anybody that's known me or educated me, anything like that, I bring them to like wheelchair basketball open gym, and I get to play against them. They get to play with me, things like that. It's pretty cool. Personally, I was impacted by so I was disabled while I was playing baseball while little. So it kind of impacted that little area, and I wasn't able to play baseball anymore. That was my first sport. It was my favorite sport before basketball or track came along, and it impacted my physicality. I didn't think I could do much after that, and then kind of once my parents kind of opened up the opportunity of, hey, there's wheelchair basketball. Started that when I was 6, and I feel like I've gotten a lot of opportunities off of it. One of them being the opportunity to start track, and then started that with Glassa and Cindy and all them, and went to Thailand for Team USA Worlds. Met a bunch of people over there like Jesse and all them, all cool people. So it's impacted me in a very very positive way.
Yeah, it's really cool. And really cool to hear how it's impacted not only like your experience as a student, but also those around you, right? In terms of perceptions and what they're learning from your participation and you kind of going for it as well. So thanks for telling us about that. Okay, now we're going to take give a little nod to the past. So Ted, this is a question for you. You've had a multitude of roles over the years, I think from starting as the jack of all trades, right? And now evolving into an academic career and
Right.
ongoing advocacy. How have you seen adaptive sports evolve over the course of your long and storied career?
I would say it's been 50 years actually this year, from 76 to 2026. And at that point, you talk about role models. Well, it was hard enough to find competition, is hard enough as a coach to find athletes. There was, a lot of the technology of today of social media and broadcast, let's say with NBC starting in 2014, we had none of it. We were basically behind a curtain, and it was by pure fluke almost. So for me, if most people look at me, they don't see a person with a disability. Well, I survived 3 traumatic head injuries, 3 broken necks, incomplete, starting at 17 in football. But I still had this notion I was going to play college football. And I tried, but I was on crutches more because I had knees that needed to be surgically fixed back in the 60s, which really wasn't, let's say, the new age of orthopedic surgery. So I'm a mess. I'm on crutches most of my college career, surviving the head injuries, 2 of them, and trying to figure it out. Because sport was, even though I was a political science major, sport was my life, just like everyone else on this panel. And so, what am I going to do with this? Well, there wasn't exactly a clear linear plan. So, I luckily enough got taken in by the father and mother of the disability rights movement, Ed Roberts and Judy Heumann, and I became highly radicalized. At which point began to look at the issue of equity, segregation, involving those of us with or without obvious disabilities. And it was by pure fluke I met Harry, 1980, my Paralympic debut. And then I retired in 1983 and became the head coach. But I was always interested in organizations. So during that time from the mid 80s, our team evolved. We had to integration actually involved people with different disabilities, blind, visually impaired, locomotor standing, sitting. My sport was cross country skiing. So that's where I devolved into. So that's a perspective lens I'm going to look at this in answering your questions. It was the alphabet soup internationally of different disability organizations designed around basically disability and not sport. And so we had a very simplistic classification system, rather crude, rather. You almost had to find 6 other people in the world that looked like you, and then you show up someplace and you perform. I mean, it was bizarre. Nothing as any of you see today. You had to pay your own way. You had to raise everything. You had to, any media outlets, you had to do that. You were your own promotion vehicle. And so it was very crude. And a lot of it, some of it time came through because I was involved in ski sport, the rehab hospital in Denver. And so you're looking at pockets, but nothing was organized. And yes, we had some conversations with the U.S. Olympic Committee at the time because of the Amateur Sports Act of 1978 had a mention, but nothing really formative in terms of how, let's say, and we'll talk a little bit later about this in terms of how government organizations and so forth, but it was very crude. And so some of us actually plotted and schemed how we were going to change the international structure, let alone the national structure. And so in skiing, we were the first team that actually was integrated into a national ski team, a national governing body in 86 with the U.S. skiing. We also, because we had problems with getting enough people together to have a national championship, so we created a very controversial still, as you know, in the IPC, the time factor system. 3 classes in cross country, 3 classes in alpine. We created that in 86. The US created that, but we had no profile that let's say the strong nations in Europe were going to accept this. So we gave it to the Norwegians and we gave it to the Germans. And they liked that. So they actually became, some of the strongest voices for this system. So what happened? It allowed elite sport to emerge, not this great disparity between the top and the bottom of a particular racing class, as you well know, being, individual athlete, you go to the start line. Some people aren't very good and they hope to just finish, and others are competing against you. So in the early days, it was equipment. The equipment was just, again, very, very crude, and it required the creativity of a number of athletes saying, I can do better with this, work with engineers and so forth. So that wave, and then we get the ADA, in 91, and things started to change a bit with the formation of the IPC, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. But so the whole so-called alphabet soup of there's a organization, or maybe not, they're not funded. So everything was just quite literally, hand to mouth in terms of developing any sport within this whole framework. I mean, our host today, Move United, had three other names. National Handicap Sports and Recreation Association, NHS, DS USA, and now Move United, and then they incorporated US Amputee Athletic Association and others. So it's this whole evolution. But what I would say is a real in the other thing that happened in the old days is we had basically, we would call it, and this is not to denigrate Special Olympics, but we were just ground, from a fundraising standpoint, from a knowledge standpoint. I had to keep reminding my family that we were involved in the Paralympics, not Special Olympics. And that's no denigration to that organization or what they do. It's just we're different. Okay.
Yeah.
Our whole evolution is different, but you always had to explain it. And even to this day, with all the presentation with NBC, which is wonderful, but we assume we're in a bubble because we're looking at people like us. And yet there's a whole population out there that still needs to be made more fully aware. On the academic side, and two things. One is my dissertation, as Mary will remember with some horror, because of the length and pain it was to read it. But it was on a rights-based standpoint. It looked at race, gender, and disability and creating new equity paradigms in sport, basically looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, and not segregation. So I would say I'll leave it kind of there. Is the movement has really arced over time in terms of interest, investment, change in leadership. And to your point, the key note along the whole way was it was fits and starts, leadership. And when leadership changed, we went backwards.
Yeah.
Different group comes in, we move forward. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you, Ted. I think it paints the picture, especially for those who might be newer to adaptive sports, either as athletes or leading organizations or as advocates. It's important to recognize where we've come from, and the history and all of the decades of work and leadership that's gone into bringing us to this point today. Um, so talking along the lines of how we think about adaptive sports and how what we do dovetails with broader disability rights. Anjali, could you talk a little bit about what progress you've seen and what you're most proud of in terms of inclusion and visibility for our community?
Absolutely. There's so many accomplishments that I'm proud of us for as a movement and as a field. And, I'm a researcher, so I do want to name that the fact that we have a field of disability sport research and that we have research that shows the value of adaptive sport is pretty cool. We know now that those that are involved in adaptive sport are more likely to have a positive disability identity, hold a steady job, have less health complications. The fact that we have that work points to this progress. We've also seen progress in relation to policies. So, Mary was mentioning the United Nations. And so we have Article 30.5 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that specifically calls out that people with disability are able to participate on an equal basis with others in recreational, leisure, and sporting activities. And that's a testament to the late Eli Wolf. In the United States, we have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act that allows for equal access and opportunities for disabled people to enjoy the similar sports programs and services and venues, which includes things like national parks, you know. I'm tremendously proud when I think about what Chuck was saying about, his experience growing up, the progress that we've made in terms of the visibility of adaptive sport icons now on television advertisements and who are represented in children's books from other adaptive athletes who have become authors. So Patty Cisneros Prevo, Minda Dentler, and their toys that depict adaptive sport beyond just the iconic Paralympic Barbie, which was very monumental for my generation, and I'm sure it was
Yes.
for you too, Sherry.
Yes.
But I was able to get my nephew a remote control wheelchair based on Aaron Fotheringham, a wheelchair BMX athlete. And there's so many more toys and dolls and wrapping paper and and things like that that represent disability sport. And I feel like that really harnesses this power of representation that has been a game changer for the visibility of adaptive sport. And so for me, that's the progress that I'm most excited about.
Yes. Thank you, Anjali. So great. And yeah, it's been fantastic to see all the enhanced exposure and across all realms, right? Whether it's for youth or adults, and the visibility, the enhanced visibility of athletic icons in disabled sport, I think has been one of the major accomplishments of our movement. So now that we've talked about what's great, we have to recognize that there are still challenges and gaps. So, Mary, could you talk a little bit about what you see as the gaps that still exist today, in terms of things like access, funding, et cetera?
Yeah, I will. And I'm a sport administration professor. So I sort of like to couch what I talk about in terms of what sport organizations can do, sort of mainstream sport organizations can do to increase awareness, which I think is the biggest thing, to increase awareness of sport for people with disabilities and just the place of people with disabilities in the sport industry. So if that makes sense, that's sort of how I'm going to approach it. But awareness, I think, is really the biggest things. And I think organizations need to be very intentional when they think about including people with disabilities in different ways and sport for people with disabilities. For example, organizations need to be thinking about their public-facing marketing. And Anjali sort of talked about that, about talking about the advertisement that we see, right? Where we see people with disabilities to think about during the Olympic Games, where both the U.S. Paralympic and the USA Olympic team logos were on screen, right? That's a big thing. It's showing equality. It's showing both at the same time. But that's public facing marketing, where people are like, "What's that logo?" And they ask, right? And that's how awareness gets raised. Um, but it's whether it's social media posts, I think. And now I'm not like social media queen here. I'm not gonna say I'm all about Facebook, which tells you probably about my age too. But I know that we need to use social media more. And we saw the impact of social media in pushing messages about Paralympic sport, certainly in the last two games. And we see how much coverage that there's been. But again, that's all about raising awareness and thinking about accessibility. And when I mean accessibility, we think about like ramps and elevators and all that, but also thinking about now all the online materials that have to be accessible, and the legislation that deals with that. Certainly, we're looking at that if we're at universities, making all of our curriculum stuff that's online, whatever, has to meet certain ADA requirements now. We have a year to do it. It was pushed back a year because there's a lot to do. But that's all about awareness, right? And raising awareness. Um, so also in terms of sport organizations, hiring more people with disabilities into management positions so others can see them and they can represent, and make allies in terms of on the management level in sport organizations, and just training people on how to interact with people with disabilities, in terms of the good customer service. Just ask, just listen. It's so simple. It's so simple. But again, raising awareness that organizations can do, and understanding, I think, the market value. And I don't mean to commodify people. It's going to sound like that, but the market value of people with disabilities and the market value of sport for people with disabilities is really starting to grow. And Ted's talked about it, Anjali talked about that as well. And we're really seeing that. And that raises awareness. And again, it really does. Money. All right, we can't talk about barriers without talking about funding. And all I can say for that is, for organizations that are wanting to invest in like in sport for people with disabilities to raise awareness, whatever, you know, put your money where your mouth is. If you're going to say that we want to do this, don't make it an unfunded mandate.
Hmm.
We've had our fill of unfunded mandates, haven't we? Um, put money into it, put the funding behind it. Whether you do that through corporate sponsorships, whether it's through private donations, however you do that, make sure that you have the funding in order to back up what you want to do. There's a lot of great ideas out there and great ideas and ways to raise awareness, but it takes resources to do that. So we are still, I think, working on that. So I hope, again, kind of taking a perspective of, what people in sport management can do to raise awareness. So I hope that that addresses what you were wanting there, Sherry.
Yeah, no, really helpful, Mary. Thank you for thinking about that whole spectrum of gaps and opportunities that might exist. So a couple quick things. Number one, to our audience, please remember that there is a Q&A function. I don't see any questions coming in yet, but please, if you're curious about anything you want to ask our panelists, please pop it in the Q&A, and we will open things up in a little bit to questions from the Zoom, so to speak. And then to our panelists, just so you know, I'm going to jump around a little bit to make sure we hit some highlights in our remaining time. Okay. So next question, Chuck, is going to go to you. Mary talked a little bit about some of the gaps in terms of the broader world of adaptive sports, but in your experience as an athlete, what are the biggest barriers that you see athletes facing today?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sherry. And I think, I bracket it kind of into two buckets. The way I think about it, right now, there's the challenges and barriers that I would say, like we'll call it rec, developing kind of early stage athletes face. Then there's the barriers or challenges that,
Yeah.
athletes who are higher level Paralympic face. I think it's worth spreading those. And so for the rec developing athletes, I mean, I think the reality is that access to equipment remains a major barrier and challenge. I think that I love and respect immensely what CAF does, Kelly Brussman, et cetera. But we need to get to a place where people aren't reliant on these organizations essentially to acquire new equipment. It's simply not a sustainable way for this to operate. And the answer is multifaceted. I don't blame manufacturers. I don't blame the grants. I don't blame anybody specifically, but it's simply unsustainable where effectively the only way athletes are able to get, like I said, brand new, tailored for them equipment is via this sort of very lengthy and reasonably so, but process. And again, the answer is not easy. My hope is that with kind of developing technologies, I know Dr. Rory out at Pittsburgh is working, or Carnegie Mellon is working on some stuff. But anyway, I just think that's a fundamental problem is this access to equipment, and I think that orgs do a great job of acquiring lots of equipment at scale sometimes can be helpful. But the reality is, as we all know, is that especially for kids who are growing, who are evolving, the equipment needs are ever changing. And then we get into, and that's just for sports chairs, which are pretty easy to get. And if someone wants to do track and field, skiing, like requires even more specialized equipment. So I think access to equipment for the people on that grassroots level is really remains the biggest struggle and challenge. And like I said, cost is unfortunately a big component of that. And when it comes to elite high level athletes, this is actually something I thought about quite a bit. I think the biggest barrier that a lot of folks who are either at that level or are very close to that level and want to sustain it to make it is the lack of ability to pursue it professionally in the way that their counterparts on the Olympic side would. There are a few athletes who can do this now, certainly. Hunter Woodhall, for example, if folks are aware of, is very much able to pursue this route. And there are some others, and I'm lucky to consider myself in kind of in that space, able to do it to a degree. But so many are not. There simply is not access to a professional type of environment to compete. Wheelchair basketball is probably the textbook example of this, where, in Europe, there's a thriving professional wheelchair basketball league. Now, I'm not simply saying, oh, let's just have one here. It's not as simple as that. I think we all know that. But the lack of professional access, even even let's take cyclists who are not at the Olympic level, but a couple tiers down, can easily find a job riding on a professional team and making money doing it and sponsorships and things like that because there's such access. Now, the good news about that particular concept is I think there's potentially a lot of overlap that can exist. There's no reason that, and this does happen to be clear, tire sponsors, bike tire sponsors can sponsor Olympic cyclists and Paralympic cyclists. There's no reason there can't be overlap here. It's just a matter of sort of connecting those dots. And I do think a lot of the work that the USOPC has been doing to sort of integrate Paralympic sports into their NGBs will eventually lead to those outcomes. It just may take a little bit of time. And so I think that there, like I said, there is the benefit, there is hope and opportunity there that I think we can get there. But the real challenge, like I said, is this lack of like ability to sort of just be a professional athlete. The USOPC does surveys of this, and this is true. I should be clear for a lot of Olympic athletes as well. This is not unique to Paralympics, but it's something like if let's say 50 to 60% of Olympic athletes have to work in addition to being Paralympic athletes, it's probably in the upwards of 80 to 90% of Paralympic athletes have to work a job. And I'm not saying we're too good for work, of course, but the fact that there's not even a way to sort of just be a professional athlete and earn on that is a real barrier, and I think does lead some people who may want to compete saying, you know what, I simply can't do this. It simply doesn't make sense for me financially. And so I think that's a big barrier. And again, I'm not saying there's an easy answer today for it, but I do think that eventually if we're going to sort of mature the elite level adapted sports in this country, we'll have to start to move out of the nonprofit model, and we'll need to find some sort of way to pair up with um, companies, businesses, et cetera. But that's
Yeah.
unfortunately probably a ways down the road.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Chuck. I think we'd all concur with everything you've just stated. And I like how you broke it down into kind of the community-based, like developing athlete versus those that are trying to sustain an elite career. I think there's so many parallels to women's sports as well, right? We've seen women's sports professionalize dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years, and I hope that we reach a similar tipping point in the not too distant future. So Gianni, we want to make sure to give you the mic here. But could you talk a little bit about your experience and nat our inaugural National Adaptive Sports Day? Clearly everyone here on this Zoom is probably part of the family already, but how do we hope that this day really impacts the broader public and people who might not be aware of adaptive sports?
Yeah, so I hope that it gives people an idea of what, in a way, we are trying to accomplish, and um, what we hope to accomplish, and open people's eyes to like the little things, kind of. Not a lot of people see, a little wheelchair basketball team or wheelchair track team or things like that. They just kind of, see it and are like, oh, okay, cool. It's not like, you know, they care too much. But my hope is that they see more, and they're kind of open to accepting these types of things.
Yeah. Yeah, just general awareness, right? Like
Yep.
the more we can get in front of people, right? And educate about adaptive sports. And as I think everyone on the panel would agree, the more people learn about adaptive sports, the more they start to think differently about disability writ large, right? And you see some of those biases and stigmas start to melt away, which is, I think, part of why we're all so passionate about what we do. Great. So one more question to the panel, and then we're going to address some of the things that have come in the Q&A. Some great questions in there too. But Anjali, could you talk about what innovations you're most excited about, like what you see happening in adaptive sport in the innovation side, and what has you excited?
Yeah, yeah, I love this question, and I think that we've really seen a lot of unique innovations. I'm really excited for and it really speaks to what Chuck was describing as one of the inherent problems related to equipment and access to equipment. So one of the things I'm most excited about is the growing prominence of 3D printing and what that can do to lead to cost-effective solutions and equipment advances to really push the field of adaptive sport and allow for ingenuity to adapt for athletes with different unique disabilities and needs who might need unique customizations that can otherwise be extremely costly. And so, I'm really excited for sort of the technological innovations and so forth that I think that we're really on the cusp of, and we're seeing more and more sports and governing bodies really, make that concerted effort and investment, into these growing technologies. I would also say I think that the other piece of that I don't want us to lose sight of when we think about innovation is also just remembering to be as inclusive as we can be about remembering all athletes with disabilities. And so what I mean by that is that we've made a lot of incredible investments in sport and technology for individuals with certain types of disabilities, but not always so for individuals with high support needs. So thinking about individuals with disabilities who have more complicated disabilities, and there's just not as many sport and recreation opportunities for these individuals. There are some like power soccer and bocce and things like that, but we need more intentional investments specifically in this area of innovative technology in order to really meet the needs and of this particular population, because they've been largely forgotten about in many of the sports and sectors across the movement.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Anjali. Super insightful. Okay, so turning it to some of the questions which have come in the Q&A, and thanks everyone for submitting these. I'm going to skip around a little bit. I'm going to open it up to the panel. So panelists, please jump in on anything that you might find interesting or where you have a perspective. So to any of our panelists, can you name an example of one of the more successful adaptive sports? So think of a sport where, man, they've just grown things well, right? They've, really addressed some of these barriers. People are participating, there's good growth. And I think those examples sort of inform how we should think about sport development more broadly. So does anyone have an example they'd like to speak to?
I do.
Go ahead, Ted.
So this year, if you look at the last three Paralympic Games, and I'm going to look at this as an arc of a sport, and particularly women, and particularly sit ski women, went from basically being um, not really serious podium performers. Years ago, they didn't even exist on the team, actually, when I was coaching. It was hard to find and recruit women to the sport of cross country skiing. Look at what happened just now in Cortina. They blew away the field. And so something actually, whether it was in the water or what, has happened with that team where we were always the stepchild to alpine skiing. Alpine skiing is struggling now to perform at an international level.
Mhm.
Whereas our Nordic team, and it's not just an individual, it's four or five, and they have a pretty good depth in their development team. Something's happened there. Now you have to get into the weeds with, is it US skiing? No, it's actually US OPC is putting money into this. And with it, there's very interesting, is a real broad range of people with different disabilities. And now they're being mediated. So I would say there's an example of a team that we were not highly competitive. Yes, we won a few medals here and there. But suddenly this explosion in the last three games from Pyeongchang, Beijing, and now Cortina, where you go, whoa, what is happening there? Because we're not a traditional power.
Mhm.
So there's an example of it's all the above, training support, funding, you name it. You just go down the check boxes. Something good is happening there.
Yeah, that's a great one. Thanks, Ted. I'm going to put on like a mini panelist hat for a minute. The other one I'd point to that I think has done a particularly good job is tennis, wheelchair
Mhm.
tennis, right? If you think about
Yep.
really that arc of community level participation up through elite Paralympic sport, I think that the USTA and the ITA have really organizationally role modeled how you can lift up the para and adaptive component of your sport and help others to see it as both invest in it and help others to see it as a serious sport.
And
So,
this is a rare example also, I just want to note, of where these skiers, again, individual skiers, are actually competing and being part of the milieu in the NCAA space, which otherwise the NCAA space to me is failing. completely.
A lot of challenges there. Yeah.
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 And even though they have a responsibility because the Dear Colleague letter says not should, like the original 504 did, it says must, like Title IX. And yet, unfunded mandate, lack of intentionality, lack of interest, and it just floats away.
Hmm.
But these athletes actually were in supportive environments in college that actually, there's two that came back with 8 medals because of their college experience, but that was on them.
Yeah.
It was not on the system, which is still generally not succeeding to support athletes in the main.
Yeah.
Uh, Even though they should be responsible to because of the Dear Colleague letter of 2013.
Yeah. And for those on the Zoom who might not be aware, the Dear Colleague letter is essentially a way to establish and clarify what public policy was meant to intend. So this
Mhm.
is a letter that in 2013 was published that tried to clarify that inclusive education was meant to include sports and physical activity. And I would say it does go back a little bit, Mary, to your point about unfunded mandates, right? It's like we're telling all these schools out there that they should be doing this, but of course, many are not doing it to the level that we'd like to see.
No accountability structure to actually even find them, if you will. And now with different political situations in Washington, forget about it. But um, the, there is actually Judy, you, and Ann Cody in 2022 did a great, you know,
Yeah.
human perspective, which actually speaks to this. And I would encourage people on this Zoom to go find that Zoom because you guys were brilliant. You really framed that very well.
Thank you. Thanks, Ted. Great. So I want to get to one or two more questions. So this one's from my buddy Joe Lamar out in the Boston area. So Joe asks, knowing that sports for everyone, how do we get more people involved? Like how, whether it's youth, adults, what do our panelists think about how we help recruit? Go
I,
ahead, Chuck.
I'd love to jump on that briefly, just because I think it's a great question and it's something that here at Michigan, we kind of through our director, Dr. O, who I'm sure some people are familiar with, and we've really embraced this mindset of adaptive sports are for everyone. And when we say that, what we mean is that we really want anyone to come try and participate and be compete in adaptive sports. And obviously, we know that if one wants to become competitive in para sport to the Paralympic level or something like that, of course, you need to have a qualifying impairment of some kind. But below that level, our mindset is like, come play, come try, come do it. And we have drop-in programs for wheelchair tennis, wheelchair basketball, wheelchair rugby, and track and field and powerlifting and things like that. We have all kinds of programs that are available to anyone. Our mindset is basically like, look, we have to be open to everyone because you never know who's going to pull somebody else in, right? And lots of people, there's lots of other ways to do this. I'm not saying our way is the perfect way, but our approach has been like, let's make sure there's spaces that are intentionally open for anyone to come. As Dr. O had this wonderfully pithy line I've stolen, just if you can sit, you can play, which is true for many para sports, not true for everyone, of course. But that mindset, I think, is how we've approached. This is how we get adapted sports into as many people as possible. The other program I'd be remiss if we didn't mention is that we've also embedded adapted sports into the PE curriculum in the middle schools in our area, and I think we're moving to high schools as well. And so kids literally, disabled or non-disabled, go through adaptive sports as part of their schooling. And it's not like hey, this is like a fun thing to do. It's like, no, this is part of your PE curriculum. You're going to learn these sports. You're going to learn to play them. And I think those two methods are great ways of doing it. We actually are now able to do it where we have a program at the end of the year where two schools like play against each other that have done this before, and I would encourage folks. I haven't even looked at this much myself, but Ohio has something like 9 wheelchair basketball teams at their school, the high school level,
Yeah.
that is mostly able-bodied students, as
Yep.
I understand it. And again, it's driving this awareness and participation of it that I think it's one of those we need to cast a wide net, because the reality is that if we only let a narrow amount of people even try it, we're gonna lose people. We need to cast the widest net possible. And I personally encourage everyone to do that. So.
I love it, Chuck. So poignant, and so well said. Okay, so I'm gonna take one more question from the Q&A, and then I think we'll start to wind up. But I think this is a good one for us to end on. And again, open it up to the panel. So this is from Amy Day. Hey, Amy, an old buddy of mine from wheelchair racing. Amy, thanks for this question. She said, What does Success for Adaptive Sports Day look like to you? So we're kicking this off today. Where could we take this, and what could this recognition mean to the broader community? Any thoughts?
Well, I have a thought of what a dream sort of would be, I guess. Um, I would love to see it be like National Girls and Women in Sport Day.
Hmm.
That is really, and
Yep.
you know, now with the auspices of Move United, you know, like National Girls and Women in Sport Day has the Women's Sports Foundation, right? We need this. We need an organization that can help drive. And I'll throw this out to the panel because I was having a conversation about this the other day. I think we need, like, they have Billie Jean King or they have major spokespersons. Who is ours?
Who's our icon? Yeah.
And so I'll just throw that out, but
Mhm.
to think about who that is, because I think that's a piece that we're missing, and I think that would really sort of put it over the top. But my dream for this, and Eli and I had conversations about this as well, was sort of like this would be like National Girls and Women in Sport Day, but for sport for people with disabilities.
I love that. I love that. That is definitely something that I think we can all get behind and aspire to. And you're right. Girls and Women in Sport Day has become pretty commonly talked about, right? Like on that day, you see tons of social media around it.
Yep.
It's pretty broadly recognized and supported by a lot of youth sport organizations, women's sports organizations, and the Women's Sports Foundation. So I love that. All right, good. It's a call to action. Any of our other panelists have thoughts on that one?
I would just build briefly on what Mary said, and I think the way we could do that is because NGBs, national governing bodies, are taking on Paralympic sport. There's no reason that U.S. Ski and Snowboard now does oversee para alpine and I believe Nordic as well, right? There's no reason that USA Hockey has had sled hockey integrated for a very long time, and it starts sometimes with very simple, just social media campaigns and things like that. But there's really no reason that it can't be scaled pretty easily because those organizations are now, having that in-house. USATF is probably the biggest one that now has Paralympic track and field. So I think it's a great idea, and I think that it makes sense. You could easily scale it that way.
Hmm. Hmm. I love it. I think, yeah, great. Another great idea.
And this is Anjali. I would just add to, I think I was really blown away by the so many organizations who signed the National Adaptive Sport Day pledge
Yeah.
this, today being the inaugural day, because it wasn't just the same old usual suspects of those within the adaptive sport community. And so my dream is to see that bubble grow and expand even more. Like there was a smattering of mainstream organizations and entities who were welcomed into this fold, like the American Hiking Association, National Parks and Rec, Human Kinetics, other mainstream NGBs, some of which our panelists have talked about. And I think my hope is growing on what Mary was describing is, what does this day look like, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Who are those other entities and organizations that will be joining this pledge?
Hmm. Couldn't agree more. The cast the net broadly, right? All are welcome and all are needed to support this movement. Fantastic. Okay, well, we have just a couple minutes left. So, firstly, I want to thank all of you on our panel. This was such a um, I use the I word in a very positive light here. Such an inspiring hour. And I feel really motivated and just lifted up by this discussion and our community coming together in this way. So thank you to all of you. And thanks for everyone who joined us. It's been a lot of fun. And as noted, we will carry the torch forward together for future National Adaptive Sports Days, but also for all the other days in between. And thank you out there everyone for all that you do to promote adaptive sports and promote and grow these opportunities for people with disabilities to be a part of it all. And with that, I will turn it back to our colleagues at Move United. Kaylee, I think I'm turning it back to you.
Yes, thank you, Sherry, and thank you, panelists. Oh my gosh, I'll give a round of applause to everybody on the panel. Um, Gosh, I took a lot of notes and had some wonderful insights from you all today, and I just really, on behalf of Move United, truly appreciate you all for volunteering your time and sharing your insights with us on this inaugural National Adaptive Sport Day. So thank you so much. Um, For those of you in attendance, please continue to celebrate this day. Definitely on social media. Utilize the hashtag National Adaptive Sport Day. Share your stories, share your images, and celebrate with us throughout the day. And hopefully we'll be back here next year celebrating once again. But celebrate all those moments in between throughout the year. And if Move United can be of assistance to anyone, please reach out to us. Certainly, the member services team is here to assist if anyone needs anything. If you are not a Move United member yet, please reach out to us. We'd love to bring you into the Move United family. I dropped my email in the chat earlier, but I'm happy to follow up with folks as well. But thank you again, panelists, and thank you, attendees, for being here to celebrate with us today.
Thanks, Phil.
Concludes our panel.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.